Let's talk about wide receivers that you need to be starting in week 7 of fantasy football. As always, we're going to break them up into 3 different categories: your smash starts, your solid starts, and your high risk, high reward starts. 9 total players, 3 categories. The guys on the screen right now are all obvious must start players. All right, let's jump right into it. Starting with the high risk, high reward section. First man up is Tez Johnson, the rookie receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because who do they have left on offense at this point? No Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin, no Emeka Ibuka, no Bucky Irving. They have no one. Who's Baker Mayfield going to throw to? I think Tez Johnson could have a big game, and he flashed last week. He had that 45-yard highlight reel touchdown, super impressive. Finished it off with the backflip. That was his only reception. He had 3 targets. Not great overall, but he still had 84% route participation, which tells me he's probably going to be the next man up in this wide receiver room for the Bucs. And he's carved out a nice role on this offense over the last 2 weeks. 5 receptions, 7 targets, not a ton, right? But 104 yards, found the end zone, and 21.6 combined fantasy points. If you do need a tight end, though, I will say Cade Otton probably is the best streaming tight end you could possibly start this week, because he's also going to see a ton of work. And Baker Mayfield, got to give the guy credit. He is playing at an MVP level right now with all the injuries on offense. He does not care, which is why I want a piece of this offense. I want a receiver that Baker Mayfield is throwing to, because he is playing out of his mind right now. Obviously, you're not cramming Johnson into your lineup, but if you need a receiver, a high upside guy who does offer some risk, but Tez is a guy who could score a 70-yard touchdown in week 7, and I would not bat an eye at all, especially because the Bucs are likely going to be chasing points on Monday Night Football against the Detroit Lions, who we know has one of the best offenses in all of football. Vegas has this game as the second highest point total on the slate. So I don't know how this Tampa Bay Bucs offense is going to score points, but they're going to have to throw to someone. I think Johnson is going to be a big part of their offense. So if you're dealing with bye weeks or injuries, you could do a lot worse putting Johnson in your lineup. While he does have some risk, he has a ton of upside. All right, moving on to our next guy, Matthew Golden, the rookie receiver for the Packers, who's coming off his best game as a pro in week 6, 3 receptions, 86 yards, 5 targets. He also chipped in 2 carries for 16 yards, 13.2 fantasy points. Matt LaFleur, Jordan Love, get this man the football. He saw 69% of the snaps coming off a bye. You'd hope that a rookie would get more snaps coming out of the bye, the post-rookie bump, right? He didn't really see that, but who knows what they're doing in Green Bay. 39% of the air yards. You like to see that. He had a 90.4 PFF grade. It's evident to me that Golden is the best receiver on this roster. But the downside about being a receiver on the Packers is they don't have an alpha wide receiver 1. They don't force feed the football to any player. It's not like when Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers were in town. They don't do that anymore. But Golden is also a really gifted player who, if you watch his tape, he is open on almost every single route. They're using him downfield as a deep threat, as he's 3rd in the NFL on receptions of 30-plus air yards this season, and he's on a good offense, attached to an ascending superstar quarterback in Jordan Love. So if you're looking at your flex and you need a guy who could go off for over 100 yards and a touchdown, that could very well be Golden, just because of everything we talked about. While there is some risk, he could have 4 for 40, right? He's a player that at any point can have that big blow-up game that we've been desperately waiting for. And I think he does have another strong performance in week 7 against the Arizona Cardinals, beatable secondary. It's a solid secondary, but I think the Packers can definitely exploit them. Don't be surprised if the rookie scores his first NFL touchdown this week. If you like what we're doing here, if you're enjoying the video, if you like the community that I'm trying to build, I'd really appreciate if you would consider leaving a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, comment down below, watch as much of this video as possible. All those things help me out tremendously. All right, moving on to our next guy, Jameson Williams. Finally, JMO season is here. The Lions coaching staff remembered that they have Jameson Williams on the roster. And when you target JMO, good things happen. And oh yeah, Detroit, maybe you throw the ball to the guy that you just gave, $83 million to right before the season started. What? Why has he been invisible for the last 3 weeks? You gave him all this money to do nothing. It was really good to see in week 6 that they were making an effort to get the ball in his hands early on in the game and not just on these deep shots. These were shorter passes, which we like. Just get the ball in his hands. Let him work. He had 6 receptions for 66 yards, found the end zone on that really impressive catch and run where he somehow didn't get tackled. There was like 3 defenders and he kind of just ran through all of them. 7 targets. Love to see that. 18.6 fantasy points. He had an 87% route participation. Williams is always on the field. Jared Goff just needs to throw him the ball because he's always open. 27% target share. Like, awesome to see. Hopefully this is a sign of things to come because I think the Lions need Jameson Williams. Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, yeah, he's going to be open in the middle of the field. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to do his thing, but Williams is more than just a guy that is a decoy down the field, right? So Amon-Ra can get open. Williams needs to be more involved in this offense. And like I said, I hope it's a sign of things to come from what we saw last week. And we just talked about this matchup. I think it's going to be high scoring against the Bucs if they can find a way to put up points with that banged up offense. But if that's the case, then yeah, I want a really good player in a matchup that could score a lot of points. I want Jameson Williams. Yeah, he could give you, same with Matthew Golden. He could have a bad game or he could just win you your week. That's what you get with Jameson Williams, and the Bucs are a very beatable defense as they are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to receivers this season. So again, you're betting on the talent of Williams, this elite Lions offense, and the possibility that this game is a shootout in a very easy matchup. Really like J-Mo. Keep him in your lineup, throw him in your flex, and he could go off yet again. All right, moving on to our next category, solid starts. First guy up on this list is Ladd McConkey. Finally, Mr. Ladd showed signs of life and had his best game by far in week 6. 7 receptions, 100 receiving yards, touchdown, 9 targets, 23 fantasy points. And yeah, it helped that Quentin Johnston, who's been dominating, was not active in this one. He was out with the hamstring injury. But even so, McConkey has been trending in the right direction over these last 2 weeks as he has 37.9 combined fantasy points since week 5, along with 16 targets. I think a lot of people, myself included, kind of forgot what Ladd did his rookie year and also forgot the skill set, the talent that he has. He's a really good football player, and we know the Chargers are going to continue to throw the football at a very high rate. And we've kind of seen Keenan Allen cool off significantly over the last 3 weeks after he came out on fire. I think McConkey is going to continue to eat in this offense, and Keenan Allen has kind of dropped down my rankings. I think Allen is going to be the odd man out in this receiver room. I think it's going to be the Ladd QJ show moving forward. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think Ladd is going to go away. I think even when Johnston comes back, I think Ladd is going to have a big role on this team, and the matchup is very favorable in week 7 against the Colts, who have allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to receivers, including the 8th most fantasy points to slot receivers. So yeah, it's been rough. It's been a rough start for McConkey, but he is an absolute dog. Like that play that he made at the end of the game in week 6 against the Dolphins was super cool to see. I would expect Ladd to continue to play really well, and I would definitely be starting him if he was on my roster this week. All right, moving on to our next guy, T. Higgins, who benefited from Joe Flacco. Who would have thought taking over as the Bengals quarterback 1 last week? 5 receptions, 62 yards, 8 targets, 11.2 fantasy points. Didn't even have a big week, but it was better than anything that he had gotten from Jake Browning, who's just not a good quarterback. He set season highs in receiving yards and air yards. It's pretty clear after watching Joe Flacco march down the field against the Packers, who have an elite defense at this point, that he is the much better quarterback for the Bengals. Jake Browning is just not very good, and he gives Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins the best chance at doing anything in fantasy this year. Their ceilings are much higher now that Flacco is the starting quarterback, and once they start building some rapport, get the timing down, big blow-up games are coming. We already saw it from Ja'Marr Chase, right? I think Higgins is going to have some nice games going forward, especially because the Bengals cannot run the football at this point. It's been really sad for Chase Brown, but he might be cooked at this point. The running game is non-existent. His offensive line is bad. And I think there's a good chance that Higgins goes off tonight against the Steelers, who run the 3rd most man coverage, and Higgins sports a 31% target per route run against that coverage. The overall matchup against the Steelers is not bad, as they rank 13th in fantasy points allowed to the position this season. I know it's been rough for Higgins. I know it doesn't excite you to put him in your lineup, but there's so many injuries. Teams are on bye. Higgins could definitely come through for you in a big way if you need him in your lineup. All right, moving on to our next guy, Deebo Samuel, who was limited with that heel injury in week 6 on Monday Night Football. Kind of disappointing, but he did have his worst game as a Washington Commander. 4 receptions, 15 yards, 5 targets, 5.4 fantasy points. But don't let that deter you from plugging Samuel right back into your starting lineup this week if he is healthy, right? If he is fully healthy, if he's expected to be a full go, then Samuel needs to be starting on your team, because remember, heading into week 5, Deebo was the wide receiver 7 in fantasy, averaging 23.6 fantasy points per game, and has scored 17 plus fantasy points in 4 out of 6 games, along with topping 20 fantasy points in 3 of them. He has been sensational. And even if Terry McLaurin does return in week 7, I don't think it's really going to matter. I think Deebo is going to continue to be the main target in this Washington Commanders passing attack. And even if he's not, it's not going to matter this week, because the Dallas Cowboys are horrible. They've allowed the most touchdowns and fantasy points per game to receivers this season, along with the second most yards to the position. This is another game where a lot of points are going to be scored. 2 high-powered offenses going at it. You want as many pieces of this matchup as possible on the Dallas side and the Commander side. Again, if Deebo is healthy and ready to suit up, I would be expecting a massive performance from him in week 7. All right, moving on to the smash starts section of this video. First man up is Courtland Sutton. It's really been interesting if you have rostered Sutton on your team, because he's either going to go off for a monster fantasy day or give you less than 3 fantasy points. There's no real in between. He's going to have a monster game or he's going to do absolutely nothing. But for the most part, Courtland has been really good so far this year, as he scored 17 plus fantasy points in 4 out of 6 games. But in week 6, against the Jets, against Sauce Gardner, it was really tough sledding. 1 catch for 17 yards, 3 targets, 2.7 fantasy points. Bo Nix was not great in this one as well, so that did not help. But nonetheless, week 7 is a get-right spot for not only Courtland Sutton, but for this entire Broncos offense, because they get the New York Giants, who have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to receivers this season, along with the 2nd most receiving yards per game. I would be starting Sutton with a ton of confidence this week. It's pretty apparent, it's pretty obvious that he's going to have a massive bounce back performance in week 7. All right, moving on to our next guy, Rashee Rice. It's been a long 6 weeks if you've been a Rice owner, but you could not be more excited to get him into your starting lineup. And let's not forget, before Rice suffered that season-ending knee injury, he was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy, 17 plus fantasy points in all 3 games. He led the NFL in receptions and ranked 2nd in receiving yards. He was on his way to a massive season. He was going to break fantasy. He was going to be top 5, top 2, maybe the wide receiver 1 overall last year. But what has really changed this year, where he can't just pick up where he left off last season? Travis Kelce's probably going to go back to his decoy role, where he's not really targeted a ton by Mahomes. And Xavier Worthy is going to help stretch the field, open up the middle of the field for Rice to do some damage. But I do think Worthy will still be serviceable. I don't really know about Travis Kelce. The good thing, the only positive from the 6-game suspension, is that Rice could get fully healthy coming off that knee injury. He should be good to go. I know the Chiefs sometimes are a little cautious easing their players back in, so it should be interesting to see what that looks like for Rice in week 7, but it doesn't matter. You're starting Rashee regardless, and the matchup is great against the Raiders, who have allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game and yards to receivers this season. And on top of that, Patrick Mahomes is absolutely cooking right now. He is playing like Patrick Mahomes, but he is just playing absolutely fantastic. This Chiefs offense looks incredible, and now they get arguably their best offensive weapon outside of Mahomes back into the starting lineup. I think Rice could absolutely take this Chiefs offense to the next level, as well as take your fantasy team to the next level. So yeah, he's in your starting lineup. Feel really good about it. Feel good that he's finally back, and I think he goes off in week 7. And moving on to our next guy, DK Metcalf, who's another guy that's been cooking these last couple of weeks. I've honestly been really impressed with his overall usage and creativity, considering he's still on a boring Steelers offense, somehow still led by Arthur Smith, who we don't love. But I suppose if there was ever a player to break or change Smith, it would be Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he's having some sort of influence here, but Metcalf has scored double-digit fantasy points in every game this season and had a really strong performance in week 6, 4 receptions, 95 yards, got into the end zone, 9 targets, 19.5 fantasy points, and he scored a touchdown in 4 straight games. I don't think enough people have been talking about what Metcalf is doing. He's been really impressive, and he also ranks 2nd in yards after the catch per reception, 4th in fantasy points per route run, 6th in yards per route run, along with seeing a career-high 22% slot rate. He's being utilized out of the slot. DK Metcalf. That is an absolute cheat code considering his size and speed. You really love to see that, especially from a fantasy perspective. And that was something that really elevated Drake London last year in his first year with Zach Robinson as offensive coordinator. So if that slot usage continues for Metcalf, watch out because he could be in for a monster year. I think he stays hot in week 7 against the Cincinnati Bengals, who rank 27th in yards allowed to receivers this season, along with allowing the most yards after the catch this year. So yeah, it's a great matchup against the Bengals, who can't stop anyone on defense. I think DK is playing really good football right now. It helps that he's attached to Aaron Rodgers, and I think he continues to ball out this week. That's all I have for you guys today. Really appreciate you all tuning in, watching this video. Let's get some W's this week, and I'll see you in the next one.